Welcome to RenMac Off Script, where we'll discuss markets, economics, policy, history, and life. It is the 5th of July, 2024. I'm Jeff DeGraff.
I'm Neil Dutta.
And I'm Steve Pavlik.
As a reminder, all the charts that we reference are posted to our Twitter account at RenMac LLC and our LinkedIn page as well. And if you want to follow us on YouTube, we have a YouTube channel where we host this and a few other educational topical ideas. Well, let's get right to it. Steve, we're going to tap the brakes on yours because it has some shelf life, but we're going to go to Neil. Neil, payrolls seem to be in line, but you always have a good twist and read on what's going on. Dude, you look like you're right in the camera. Well, take it easy, man. All right, better. What was up with payrolls today?
I mean, I don't know that anything was up with payrolls. But at any rate, I mean, I think, the important thing about this is really what it means for the Fed, right? And it's just not a close call. I mean, the unemployment rate is up. It's at 4.1%. Yes, that is low historically. No, the SOM rule has not been triggered. But why would you want to wait for it to be triggered? I mean, the risks are all in one direction. So the unemployment rate is up. It's gone up 1/10 for the last 3 months. So 3 consecutive months where the unemployment rate has gone up. And the rate of employment growth is slowing. It's running at 177,000 over the last 3 months on average. So unemployment up, payroll growth is moderating. There's all these debates about, jobs growth is still strong, and who cares? I mean, it's not enough to keep the unemployment rate from rising. And ultimately, that's what the Fed is looking at when they're looking at, the summary of economic projections. That's what they forecast. And at the end of the day, the unemployment rate is higher than the Fed thinks it's going to be at the end of the year. So we're already where they thought we would be 6 months ahead of schedule. That we're higher than we thought that we would be 6 months ahead of schedule. So I just think the trade-offs have shifted. So either the Fed's cutting in July. Yes, I said that. I think it's possible they could cut in July. I mean, if you get a weak core inflation number next week, I mean, the doves are going to go into that meeting at the end of the month with so much ammunition that it's going to be very difficult for the hawks to kind of push back. So it's possible. But at a minimum, they're going to use the July meeting to set up a rate cut in September. So that's kind of where I shake out on this. I mean, if you look at total hours worked over the first 6 months of the year, it's up about 1%. So at an annual rate. And if you assume that productivity is running at about 1%, you're talking at you're looking at about a 2% economy. Which isn't a disaster, but ultimately this is about trade-offs. I mean, the Fed is a risk management enterprise. So for them, it's really about, do you want the soft landing or not? You can't really, I think it's very difficult to talk about what is the right tail for growth. It's really difficult to come up with one right now. I mean, is it going to come from housing? No. Is it going to come from inventory restocking? I mean, you just had it happen for a quarter. I mean, it looks like it's going to happen in Q2, and then what? So with respect to the consumer and with the labor markets are shifting, like where's the upside for the consumer? So I think it's a very ho-hum kind of economy. So it's very difficult to talk about these right tail risk scenarios. And we know that inflation is a lagging indicator. That's not me saying that. That's Ben Bernanke saying that. And the reason, monetary policy quells inflation with a lag. That's one of the reasons why inflation lags in the first place. So what do we know? We know inflation has been slowing. We know that policy hasn't been changing. So why would inflation start to perk back up? So I really just think it's kind of ridiculous at this point. And as I say, it's time to just get on with it. We've been saying for a while now, the Fed wants to have the option of going 3 times this year. I think people should take that a little bit more seriously now.
Maybe the jobs comes from all the presidential candidates that need to fall into line for the Democratic Party.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, this whole idea that the Fed's would be political if they cut soon. I mean, for who? For who? Who are they helping out? We have no idea. So it's a little. I mean, it was always a kind of a ridiculous argument. I think that wasn't really based in any sort of cogent analysis of things. I mean, as you know, I mean, right? I mean, you can always play these experiments out. Like if the Fed waited because they were afraid of the election, and then Trump wins and they go 50 on the first go, how does
Right.
that look political? So it's sort of, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. I mean, the Fed has shown in years past that they're willing to move in presidential election years. We expect them to do so this time. The markets expect them to do so this time. So it's really it's always been a nonsensical talking point. But yeah, I mean, now it's kind of, and I'll kick it over to Steve. I mean, who are they really helping at this point?
Yeah.
We have no idea. So
No
uh,
doubt. All right, Steve. So Slow Joe seems to be in the right lane, being passed aggressively on the left lane. What are you hearing in your cocktail parties down in DC?
Well, I'm actually in Pennsylvania at the moment. Which could be a very competitive state. But like I'm looking at the betting markets, and the betting markets are showing that Kamala Harris is pulling well ahead, not only of Biden, but of the other potential contenders. And I think there's probably a few reasons for that. I think just structurally, it's the easiest thing to do for Democrats from a campaign finance perspective, because it's the Biden-Harris campaign. She can actually access the funds. That's just very simple. We've talked before about the optics of passing over the first Black female vice president, conversation Democrats would probably prefer to avoid. So I think there's an idea there. And they're pointing to polling, not only bad polling for Biden, but polls showing that Harris actually performing better than Biden in the head-to-head against Trump. I would still point out that in terms of her popularity levels, I mean, she's still about the same as Joe Biden. So I'm not sure they're going to get any benefit there. I think Democrats are hoping that she will do better with younger voters and voters of color, some support groups that Biden's right now hemorrhaging according to the polls. That said, she's probably not going to perform as well with some of the voters that Biden had been making inroads with, specifically suburban voters and older white voters. So like anything in life, there's a trade-off. My guess is if she is the nominee, that they will go ahead and play somebody like Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, there to try to pick off that state from an electoral background, but again, play somebody more moderate to try to balance out the ticket. And the other, I guess, attraction with going to Harris is I think they're going to have to make her a quasi-incumbent. By that, I mean, it's difficult to say Biden can't run for president, but he should still remain in office through January. My guess is they're probably going to have to think seriously more about having him step aside and having her assume the responsibilities. And again, that would make it easier just from sort of quasi-debate, I guess, sort of quasi incumbent perspective to run. And look, Biden's not going down without swinging. He is really putting a lot of emphasis on this weekend to try to turn things around. Depending on when you're listening to this, this is Friday morning. He's supposed to have an interview with George Stephanopoulos, former Bill Clinton press secretary. So it's a scripted setting in the sense that, I guess they're going to say it's unscripted. Surprised if the questions weren't relayed ahead of time, and that the videos weren't edited to be more favorable for Biden. Do I think that's enough to overcome what people saw last Thursday? No. And I think this gives Harris supporters and others some more time to think about how to best make this transition.
It doesn't overcome it because these idiots think that they can continue to jam it down the American people's throats and edit things and have these pre-scripted things and call it like, oh no, look how well he did. Show us the entire tape. Just show us, just record it. Show us the whole thing uninterrupted. Maybe throw a few, Mucilex commercials on there, whatever. But like, when you're going to do anything that's edited with the media, anybody who has any modicum of sense is going to say, well, they're just cherry picking the best parts.
Well, to your point, Biden is supposed to give a press conference next week after the NATO summit, and that's supposed to address what you're saying. Is let's see him completely unscripted, depending on how this interview goes with George Stephanopoulos. I'm skeptical that's going to make much of a difference. And look, you can point a lot of fingers right now. A lot of concerned Democrats. When Neil was talking about jobs, it's not unique to Democrats. Look, the only job that politicians from either party care about is their own. And if think you can help them keep their job and expand their power, then they're all for you. But if they think you're going to hurt them, then they quickly turn on you. And I think that's what you're seeing. And even the media, I mean, I would argue they've been largely complicit with this narrative so far. But after people saw what they saw last week, you've seen several progressive media outlets Some would argue that's one and the same, but they're all turning now on Biden, as I think, some readers and viewers are probably wondering, hey, what were you telling me the last 3.5 years?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to keep any integrity, any credibility, they have to turn. Like, there's just no, look, you've told us this for a year at least. He performed well in the State of the Union, right? But there's all these little gaffes, and you wonder, okay, well, are these gaffes, again, edited and set, a setup job? What's happening? So there was a question in a lot of people's minds, and then he had the opportunity to absolutely quell those questions, and he did. He did exactly the opposite. He confirmed every concern that was out there. I mean, forget it. It's just
And going back to the credibility, I mean, first it was he had a cold, but then he's at the Waffle House an hour later delivering some impassioned remarks on a teleprompter, and the next day in Raleigh. So did he have some miraculous recovery? And it's like, oh, well, it's a blip, it's a one-time thing. But then all the stories come out like, well, no, it's not necessarily a one-time thing. And that's, well, he was overseas. He was, but that was 12 days before the debate, and he had a whole week to prepare at Camp David. So people just, I think now are starting to push back on some of these explanations, so to speak, and they're not really buying it.
Yeah, these narrative pushers should be absolutely ashamed of themselves and embarrassed at cocktail parties. I mean, I wouldn't even want to have a conversation with these guys. I mean, it's ridiculous. I feel, I feel sorry to an extent for some of them because they're put in these positions, the press secretary, etc. But at some point, you should just step aside and say, my own credibility is more important than your political future. Ridiculous. Go ahead, Neil.
No, I have nothing to say about
what? What? Jesus. All right. Let's talk about the market cycle clock. The market cycle clock came out earlier this week, and we moved back down into a more bullish zone where inflation was more accommodative. Growth continues to be at an aerodynamic stall rate. So that tends to be good for the markets. I know that seems like it's counterintuitive, but that tends to be more supportive for the markets because the Fed is not forced to take the punch bowl away. In fact, if anything, they're more encouraged to pour a little bourbon into said punch bowl. So we'll see. I thought the most interesting thing, and it's certainly not something that we would put a lot of weight on, but it's icing on the cake, was some seasonal work that we did, some seasonal studies. And one of the things that clients always ask us is, particularly in a year like this, where we have a 14% return for the first half, well, did we just pull forward all the returns for the year and we'll just be flat going into the end of the year? And I know that feels like it might be a nice call. It feels like that's the way the market should work. But when we look at it, that's actually not the way the markets work. In fact, this 14% number, 14.5% actually, is in about the 80th percentile historically, right? So if you look at the first half returns and you bin those into 10 separate deciles, if you will, this one falls into the 80th percentile, which would be between 12.8% and 14.7%. The top decile being 18.7% and 57.7%. So this 80th percentile suggests, when we look at it historically, excuse me, that the second half returns are actually almost just as robust, about 12.5% for second half returns when you have this 80th percentile reading. In other words, when we're between 12.8%, 14.7%, historically, your second half returns are on average about 12.5%. And what's interesting is that skew is actually to the right. In other words, the returns tend to be a little bit better than that if you look at it from a distribution standpoint. So good things tend to happen. The other part of this that I thought was really shocking is when we look at seasonality from a first half of the month, second half of the month, for all months going back through time, back to 1928, we find that the first half of July is actually the strongest, stronger than the end of December, stronger than the first half of January. The first half of July is the strongest of all seasonal periods by halves of months. So we still have another roughly 2 weeks to go in that zone. So we'll see how that ends up playing out. The one concern I would have turning on the Bloomberg this morning after taking the hiatus from the Independence Day holiday is that Bitcoin has broken down we're right at 55,000. That's officially below the support level. We were using 55,000 as kind of that cushion to look at, but there clearly is a relationship between the NDX and what we see historically out of Bitcoin. So at the margin, we're starting to see some of that pressure. Neil?
I get this question a lot. Are cyclicals outperforming? Because you do see a lot of this sort of stuff floating around, like cyclicals are doing better, like discretionary is outperforming staples. And
Yeah.
it just seems like a red herring kind of. I mean, because I think we had a note out to clients today about how home building is doing worse. And if you look at some of the retail names, they're doing worse. And if you look at most of the industrial names, they're doing worse. So, but yet people talk about how cyclicals are outperforming. Oh, discretionary is outperforming staples. I mean, so are cyclicals outperforming? And
Yes.
can you answer this question like definitively?
Equal weight. I mean, how do you define the two, right? So we define them based on their correlation to GDP historically. And if you look at that, then cyclicals are industrials, technology, and discretionary. Defensives are utilities, healthcare, and staples. If you equal weight them, which you have to do, otherwise Amazon obviously dominates discretionary. Cyclicals are making new highs versus the the defensive names. So that is happening. If you equal weight them, cyclicals versus discretionary versus staples, that's also happening. But I would say within discretionary, it is a hodgepodge, right? You end up with home builders, which look like they're topping. Autos are in there. Retail, which is everything from specialty retail to broadline retail and apparel, etc. So it's a mixed bag. Restaurants are in there, hotels. So it's when people make the claim about either industrials or discretionary as a sector, we always get a little nervous because there's a lot of diversity within those two groups. They're very heterogeneous. Some of them actually have defensive characteristics. Some of them have offensive characteristics. But if you're asking me, are they outperforming in mass on an equal weighted basis, kind of mano a mano? Yes, they are.
Got it.
Where are you, by the way? Montauk?
Montauk. It's definitely turned into I've been coming here for almost 30 years. And it's definitely changed in that time.
Better or worse?
I think the way you come down on that is largely a reflection of how you feel about the people that are now coming.
So worse. Understood.
Yeah. I remember living in the city and you used to talk about the bridge and tunnel crowd, and that's feels like a lot of fin bros, but I'm just waiting for one of them to come up to me and be like, "Aren't you Neil Dutta?"
Oh, hello. Right. Yeah. Security.
Get out of my face. I'm trying to have a meal with my kids.
All right. What's on the docket next week, Neil?
Inflation. CPI inflation is the only thing we need to worry about for next week. That'll come out on July 11th, which I think had been a date important for the Trump stuff. I don't know if it's still an important date, but July 11th is the main event. And if it comes in weak, go along the front end, because I think it's probably mispriced. I mean, there's a decent chance the Fed just pulls the trigger.
Perfect. And Steve, what are we watching from the Biden campaign, the Biden-Harris campaign? Let me correct myself for that.
Okay, we'll see what happens this weekend. Watch that NATO press conference. Neil mentioned July 11th. That was originally supposed to be Trump's sentencing date. However, the Supreme Court ruled last week, as we thought it would, that Trump's immunity claim that they're going to get to lower courts to try to define that more. But there should be presumption of immunity for official acts. But that, again, definition isn't exactly defined. It's lower courts. Long-winded way of saying Trump's trial is not going to happen before November on that. And it also means now that Trump has appealed the decision in the New York hush money case, so that sentencing won't come until September. So that's one less thing to worry about. I'd also watch we talked about the betting markets and the political side, but you're also seeing some impact, I think, from those into the stock market. You're seeing a lot of Trump trades, industries that would fare better under Republican control, performing better, according to a Bloomberg analysis. And I think that's important because, if Trump wins, there's probably a greater likelihood now that Republicans are also not going to win the Senate. We thought that regardless of the presidential outcome, because they have a favorable map, the Republicans carry a House. And where I'm going with that is we've talked a lot about this tax debate next year. And you've seen some, I believe, the spreads between the 2-year and the 10-year sort of pricing in at least an extension of the Trump tax cuts next year, or a clean extension, potentially even going beyond that. So you're talking about that, being more adding to the debt, more inflationary. So something to, I think, consider. It just makes me think about, what Neil was talking about, the Fed and, playing things by the book. It's just interesting because if these people really think that they're going to have Republican control, and they do take that action, Republicans will perceive it as something that's meant to benefit Biden. Again, the economic benefit may not happen before November. Again, if Biden's even the nominee, maybe I'll just say the Democratic nominee. But, the optics for somebody like Kamala Harris to say, look, inflation is behind us. That's why the Fed is cutting. Looking at that political benefit. I just mentioned that is because they're going to control the appropriations, and they're going to be lugging these people up to Capitol Hill. Do you really want to get off on the wrong foot with some of those people? Again, no evidence to support that, but people are people, just something to consider as they may be considering when they get to September.
Is what side of the fence do you see Stephanopoulos on here for this interview?
I mean, clearly he's a Democrat. I don't know whether he's
but is he sympathetic, or is he in the I have to save my credibility, I need to prop this guy up, or I need to save my credibility.
I thought Nikki Haley did a pretty good job with respect to his credibility. She brought up when she was running for president that Kamala Harris would be the nominee, that Biden wouldn't finish the race. And Stephanopoulos in that interview at the time crucified her for saying that, saying she had no basis for that. She just, well, look at him. And now she is taking a victory lap or two on social media to point that out. So to your point, though, I don't know whether he's part of the Democrat camp that wants to push Biden out for Harris, or whether he's sort of more sympathetic and going to try to prop this up for him. I mean, clearly he's a Democrat. I just don't know which way he's going to go in terms of the interview. I, again, would be surprised if the interview questions weren't provided to the White House ahead of time. So my guess is I'd probably put him more in the pro-Biden crowd, but, we'll see.
They've got, I'm sure they're, how can we use this AI to our advantage to, come up with created Joe, AI Joe. Let's make that work. The other thing that's interesting about this, right? Which I know she's not even in the talks. Maybe she is now. It goes to how important the American electorate is now going to start thinking about the VP candidate, right? I mean, if you hit Harris for identity politics, right, but she doesn't have the merit to actually be a president, does that become more important now? And does Nikki Haley get in the race, because very popular with a lot of independents, very popular with, I would say the right more than the left, but is that a potential consideration just to kind of assuage some of the concerns that people are going to have about Trump's age?
I don't think Haley's going to get in at this stage. She's already come around and endorsed him. I think she's playing more for 28. So I'd be surprised if that happens. But we'll see. She's definitely dunking on Stephanopoulos at the moment, though, and I've enjoyed watching that.
So good. All right. Well, S&P support 5,200. Next support level 4,954 on the downside. Obviously making new highs. We're in that seasonally strong period, as I mentioned. Support for the 10-year yield 420. Getting down below that would help confirm a trend transition towards lower yields, not higher yields. And to Neil's point, once we break that, we'll start extending our durations in our asset allocation work as well. Bitcoin did break that 59,755 level. It's now down below the 200-day moving average. That is a pretty stark yellow flag. So keep an eye on that. That does imply that risk assets are being repriced. And so we'll continue to monitor that. Again, I think the seasonal strength will be more important here in the interim for the markets, but certainly something that is a change, a sea change from what we've seen over the last year and a half or so. Join us again next week. We'll be 1 week older, 1 week wiser. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter. And if you want deeper insight, RenMac Access, renmacaccess.com officially. Until then, I'm Jeff DeGraff.
I'm Neil Dutta.
And I'm Steve Pallett.
We'll see you.